Welcome back to the Inclusive Arts Project webinar on the Inclusive Arts Practice Framework. This webinar is the third of the series, and it's on inclusive arts processes. It is co-created and co-facilitated by both myself and Emmanuel Asante, who is here with us today. And I will ask Emmanuel to introduce himself now, if that's okay.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Emmanuel Asante. I live in Garo Country, Fairfield, and I'm a visual artist. My specialty is involved in the use of coffee, pen, and acrylic, and sometimes fabric as a way to trace my identity as a Ghanaian Australian. And I've worked in places like Opera House, Maritime Museum, and local schools in Western Sydney. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And Emmanuel is also a member of our co-design advisory group for the Inclusive Arts Project. For those of you who may have missed my introduction yesterday or the day before, I am Rebecca. I am the project manager for the Inclusive Arts Project at NEDA. I am a Australian born, but I was raised and grew up in Japan until my mid to late teens. And I'm autistic, I have ADHD, and I am a parent and carer of two children who are also diagnosed as ADHD and on the spectrum. I am also a part-time cane user. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge country, pay my acknowledgements to elders past, present and emerging, both of the land from which I present, which is Ngunnawal Ngambri country, but also for all the lands from which my participants in this webinar gather from today. I also acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. If you feel inclined to do so, I welcome you to drop your country into chat. Before we go any further, I will advise that today's session is again being recorded and transcribed, and you should be able to view those in the chat there. If you cannot, please let me know. If you do not feel comfortable having your camera on or having your microphone on to speak, you are welcome to participate in any way that feels safe and comfortable for you. So I will just very briefly recap the elements of the framework that we addressed on Wednesday and yesterday. So in webinar 1, we focused on the inclusive entry points, our mindset for inclusive arts program. We reinforced the importance of valuing lived experience as a source of knowledge and considered the values necessary for inclusion. Acknowledging that as well that our own personal lived experience is just as valid as the lived experience of the people whom we are supporting as well. We discussed how personal history, culture, biases and media and biases affect our work, and we did a bit of a reflection on those assumptions and biases. In webinar 2, we focused on enabling environments, so the space for an inclusive arts program. We looked at our organisations and programs and acknowledged that barriers aren't just about physical access, but there are often hidden rules and inaccessible processes which are the organizational barriers, or entrenched attitudes and biases, which speak to the cultural barriers that people also experience. So, in previous webinars where we spoke about the values and the starting points that embody an inclusive program, and we looked at barriers and mitigations for some of those barriers for an inclusive environment. So the next step, clearly, is to pull those all together to ensure that the programs that we are ending up with are factoring those into the planning process. So the session objectives this time. First, we want to talk about some of the ways that you can build inclusive processes into the projects. And this is about us looking at a few ideas and simple steps around being inclusive. Secondly, our goal is to help your teams to create programs that are responsive to the needs of the community. So that means designing the programs with the artists and the communities who have the lived expertise, the people with the lived experience from different cultural backgrounds. So we want to make sure that your programs are welcoming and accessible from day one. And Emmanuel, you may see that I have changed from my original purple onion to this particular, my boss called it the brown onion. This is the graphic that demonstrates the concepts of our inclusive arts practice framework. From the first webinar, we reviewed the circle on the outside, moving through into enabling environment, inclusive processes, and then on to inclusive arts programs. So one of those key components that we covered in the first webinar was that lived experience as knowledge is to be valued and drawn on extensively, ours and others. This directly feeds into the concept of co-design as an inclusive development tool. So you may all have heard the word co-design before. It has been a bit of a buzzword in communities and government spaces and programs for a few years now. It has been utilised extensively in working with First Nations peoples, and a lot of the concepts and from that can translate through to co-design processes for culturally, linguistically diverse peoples and people with disability as well. So a commitment to co-creation and co-design is one of those key attitudinal aspects of inclusion. But as I think many of us here will be aware, it can become tokenistic if it's done badly. So we need to always ask ourselves, who is it for, and are they part of the decisions? Emmanuel,
Yes.
would you like?
I'll continue. Yes.
So, yep, go ahead, Emmanuel.
Yeah, I would like to ask the group, what do you like? What comes into mind when someone says like co-design?
I know it is something that many people have discussed before. Is there anyone that would be comfortable sharing their understanding of what co-design should mean? Or Brendan?
One of the first things that comes to mind when we're talking about co-design is that old phrase, nothing about us without us. So it's really about, for me, is making sure that the people we want to participate in our art practice are the ones that we actually first survey or speak to or consult about what is this practice going to look like? What should it, where should we go with it? What do you need and what do you want? And really, that's the starting point for any co-design in our organisation.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Brendan. And for anyone who may not necessarily already be incorporating it into their programs, it is at the base the process where people with the lived experience are actively involved as equal partners. So, yeah, planning, implementing, the direction, all of the above. Manuel?
Why is it important?
Anyone? So I think Brendan may have already touched on this briefly when he said, nothing about us without us.
Yes.
So again, it comes back to the people the program is for, the people it is supporting and including need to be part of the decision-making process and the steering process. So it's important because in terms of co-design, it builds trust, it builds relevance, it challenges biases, and it does lead to more inclusive, effective outcomes. It's not just good practice. It's rights-based, it is respectful, and it can be transformative. From a code, in terms of co-design, it does need to be implemented at the very initial steps because whenever there are any decisions made without that co-design process being considered, we are making assumptions right from the outset about what a group or a program needs. So the next part is
how do you do it?
Would anybody like to tell me how they feel that co-design should look? Best case scenario.
I'm happy to share. Also, I'm Patrick, and apologies for not coming to the first two sessions. I'm here with Ash Morris, part of Rogue Access. But I think for myself, and speaking as like a disabled person of colour as well, I think co-design, when it's done really well, it starts with transparency and equality in how people are working, which means you have an equal amount of information to the organisers. You're being all on paid time, the same as when you're working with organisers. And also that the intentions are really clear around that it's okay for people to say no to that offer to work together. It's okay for people to ask for what they want and need, and that the space is ready to be transformed and responsive to the people from community that they're going to be collaborating with. And it's not just come into this space so we can tick a box of having an advisory committee, but not really being ready to take on what that advisory committee is going to give you. So having the readiness to change and the openness to be really responsive to what the community members are going to bring.
Equal power, equal responsibility, and decision-making control is really important. And Ash, you wanted to add something to that?
Oh no, I accidentally just raised my hand instead of doing an emoji react.
I think I have done that before myself. So yeah, as Patrick has mentioned, and I believe as Brendan had said earlier also, it does need to be a really responsive and safe space and process. But some people obviously will have, as we spoke of yesterday, that advocacy fatigue and may not necessarily feel comfortable being a part of that process, and that is okay too. But when somebody does accept being a part of the process, it is really important to do so appropriately. So first and foremost, that does mean paying for expertise, attending meetings, providing feedback, giving information about whether it be cultural needs or language needs or physical or other support needs. That is work, and work should be paid for. If you are an organisation that does rely a lot on volunteer time, anything like that, there does need to be some sort of way of remunerating, even if it isn't financial. If everybody is in agreement and consents and understands what they're agreeing to, you can negotiate other ways that are going to work. But it starts with that respect and communication. So to do it well, obviously we do need to develop relationships and partner with other organisations and people who would be relevant. So multicultural organisations, disability organisations, other advocacy organisations, even people who may be able to help you to collaborate on that inclusion-focused programming. And it may partnering initially with organisations does help to mitigate that advocacy fatigue for individuals. Obviously, it is a case-by-case basis, though. Often there are a number of organisations as a part of the project that had reached out to us and said, we are at the very beginning of our inclusion journey. We have no contacts or networks within disability communities or within culturally linguistically diverse communities. How do we start that up? And if you really think about it, often when we actually dug down and discussed with those organisations who and what they did know and the contacts that they did have, often there are actually avenues and people that they do know that they could reach out to for information or even a further contact within a community. So there is actually a small section in the workbook if anybody feels so inclined. It's a network tree to help people to visualize and break down potential contacts that they may have in that space. So there are a lot of pitfalls and ways to go wrong with co-design. And I'm sure there are a number of people that could talk to this. But one of the biggest ones is that really late implementation of the process, because co-design needs to be built in from the earliest stages of project development, or it becomes consultation. It's not co-design because decisions have already been made that you're just seeking approval for, and you're not necessarily sharing the power. So on that note, consultation, as we said, is not co-design. Consultation means asking for feedback on pre-made decisions. Co-design shares that decision making. And consultation it is valuable. It's not something that we need to avoid, need to avoid. It's incredibly valuable, but it cannot account for the biases built into decisions you made before requesting that feedback. It definitely has its place. And in the absence of actual co-design, it's not a good substitute, but worst case, it can sometimes be a semi-acceptable workaround if you do not have the resources to conduct true co-design, but you must be clear that it is not co-design. Representing that as co-design actually damages the trust, any trust that you have built up with those communities. So again, we ask the question, who's making the decisions here and who are they making them for? Another pitfall for co-design, it costs a lot, both in time and money, and mental effort as well. So on limited budgets with limited timeframes, it is difficult to incorporate co-design into programming, and it's often seen as a nice to have rather than a key component that contributes to the success and the relevance of that project. And this is another reason why consultation is very much favoured in this space, because it can be tacked on as a last minute late add-on to the game and when everything else has been done. But that does reinforce the feeling within communities that it's tokenistic and they are an afterthought. So it can be used, it can be valuable, but we need to be aware of what it means when we bring in consultation instead of co-design. And as mentioned before, one of the other difficulties can be that lack of engagement or connection to the community that we are trying to co-design or build those programs with. So without those connections, it is a very difficult starting point. As an ongoing process, it does take time to build relationships, and there are often setbacks whenever with staff turnover and situations like that. But again, that network tree is a very good place to start in terms of contacts within the industry, organisations, people with whom we have worked who may have connections to communities or organisations that can support that co-design process. So you've all got diverse yet really intersectional skills and knowledge. So collaborating together to build those networks, it's how we build that more inclusive society. So there are a lot of orgs that will try and implement co-design in a number of different ways. Some will try and do it as on an organizational level. Some will on a programmatic level. Some will have consult advisors, whether it be access advisors or cultural advisors, who will provide that service. How you do it, there's not necessarily a wrong way of doing it. A lot of people do incorporate all of the feedback in a continuous fashion. So co-design can include the feedback processes that we discussed yesterday, any sort of feedback that is incorporated that impacts and changes a program to be more inclusive is a part of that process, but it's not, again, it's not true co-design, and it's not the only part of that you would need to consider. Okay. So, So like I said before, some of those organisations, we've said disability organisations, multicultural organisations, advocacy groups, especially in really small communities, word of mouth can't be discounted as ways of making connection, that personal touch. Individuals and groups and families are big ways of getting word out and communicating with small communities in this space, and noting that some communities, both in terms of our culturally linguistically diverse communities as well as disability communities, do have local and regional social media groups that they will often communicate and connect through. So connecting to those can open up your options for connecting with the communities in order to be able to begin that co-design process. And while mainstream Australia is increasingly secular, religious leaders and venues for some communities can't be discounted as key social and supportive networks for these communities. So the next part, in terms of flexible participation, life isn't one size fits all. I think we all know that. So how we participate, how we join in, that can't be one size fits all either. We need to offer options, how people take part, where they take part, and if they have other needs in terms of how to participate. Providing flexibility and options respects everyone, and whether they need to rest, move, or communicate differently, the question you have to ask yourself is, are you counting for people who need to participate in different ways? So what that looks like, sometimes in terms of workshops and programming, it may be offering online or hybrid courses in terms of participation. It may be offering options of different creative tools or methods tied to a theme. Another organisation that is not actually here today had pivoted from offering a drawing only art workshop to creating theme-based workshops. So the medium of the art form that was used was not specified, but everybody created their art along a theme. So for example, incorporating accessible materials for participation, or encouraging the creative use of different materials that may be within an individual's environment, are all options for creative ways of participating. Did you want to add anything at all, Emmanuel? I know that you don't like interrupting me when I talk.
Nah. Yeah, I'll let you continue.
So I will just move on then, but feel free to interrupt me if you've got anything to say, Emmanuel. So flexible participation pathways. It takes extra time, effort, and thought. You need to put thought into thinking up options and workarounds for different methods of participation. It takes additional organisation, it takes additional money. So it does need to be considered early in the planning process so that participants we can consider what needs to be included. So, for example, there are organisations that have offered their dance classes, their cultural dance classes, both in person and remotely, so that that were live streamed, so that people could participate in private from their own home if they wish to do so, or they could participate in person. Additional to that, recording a class so that people can access it at a later date. Can be also more difficult to manage and gauge issues if you are doing things remotely like that, especially if it's a performance or group project. So you may need to consider building in check-ins or one-on-ones with the facilitator and the participants if you are going to consider that. So, next slide. Art is communication, or as we've said here, communication is at the heart. So art itself is probably one of the most accessible methods of communication. It doesn't necessarily require a communal language, a communal understanding. Different art forms and can bring people together and communicate in ways that we hadn't necessarily always considered. So what I'm talking about here is when we're communicating, when we're organising these workshops and we're considering the communication needs of people, we're not just talking about translating signs or putting them into easy read or plain English. We're talking about creative use of visuals and different languages and Auslan as a way of enriching the project itself. A significant issue that was identified by our co-design advisory group for both our culturally linguistically diverse communities and our people with disability, but especially and increasingly in that intersectional cohort of both, that these groups often don't necessarily assume that they are welcome or allowed in our mainstream spaces. So oftentimes, some sort of an indication to them that they are welcome or that their presence is appreciated is really important to them, and it doesn't often take much. I'm talking about if you have a significant percentage of your population speak a particular language, is there anything in that language on your marketing materials or on your website, even if it's just something that says hello or welcome or anything like that? There needs to be almost an invitation of sorts. You are welcome. Your people are welcome. Your culture is welcome. Your difference is welcome.
Yeah. I would like to add something. Yes.
Go for it.
Yeah, communication is very key. I know artists like myself who my disability is not visual, people sometimes assume that we are okay with everything, so they don't actually ask us. And sometimes we get there and then you're like stuck, and that's where you have to improvise on the spot. There have been cases whereby I've been doing facilitation whereby there was no materials like papers to give the students. So I have to take my diary and give it out to the student. There are cases like that. And also there's another circumstance some people have prejudice. Like I remember there was a time that during the school holidays, I was having a workshop in Cumberland Council, one of the areas there, and then the lady, I'm a kind of a because I don't drive. I always go early to whatever program or facilitation I have. And when I went there, the lady wouldn't let me in. Even though I wanted to talk to her that I'm the teacher or I'm the one teaching, she wouldn't. She was like, she spoke to me outside of the gate. And later on, she let me in. When she let me in, she was like, wait there, show me your ID for security reasons. And I'm like, you are the one who invited me here. So how do you again you and my credentials, my working children, everything I've already given to her already, her boss. So I was like probably I felt like very uncomfortable throughout the session teaching. So those are some of the communication issues that can happen if people have this kind of prejudice or have assumption that everything is okay. So yeah, thank you.
And Emmanuel, Ash has mentioned in the chat that they feel that that's a horrible experience and that they are sorry that you experienced that. And when it comes to that side of communication, there has often been a disconnect identified by our co-design advisory group that there are occasions where the participants participating in a workshop who may be people with communication needs, whether that be that English is not their first language, or that they may have needs that indicate that they need extra time or support to communicate either in writing or verbally. There is sometimes an assumption that the participants may need extra support, but if you are being paid to do a job, you should be able to do it without support. And that is an incredibly harmful bias that is highlighted obviously by the story that Emmanuel has shared with us, but it is also something that the co-design advisory group themselves have mentioned consistently occurring. We are paying you to do this job, therefore you should be able to do it without us providing additional accommodations. And that is not acceptable. If you are employing people that do have communication or physical or other needs, we should be supporting them with the same open-minded, unbiased attitude as we support the participants in our programs. So in terms of incorporating methods of communication into our programs, there are so many different places where this is incredibly relevant. In the planning, in the organisation, but also in the delivery of the programs themselves or the concepts for the programs. So whether a program needs Auslan interpreters or technical communication boards or storyboards to communicate what the program is about, or even multilingual approaches and technology-assisted tools, actually incorporating those into as artistic and collaborative strengths rather than just as accessibility add-ons. So that could mean, and potentially has in the past, a performance, a theatre-based performance only delivered in Auslan, but with captions for or other access subtitles for people who don't necessarily understand Auslan, flipping the script. Alternatively, there have been artists and programs that have incorporated things like mobility aids into either visual or performing arts pieces. There is a burlesque school here in the ACT that incorporates mobility aids, canes, walkers, wheelchairs, powered wheelchairs, all into their burlesque routines, and using that as a really creative and beautiful way of showcasing the diversity and the extra really beautiful, interesting things that you can do when you are using a tool that is not always used. So it's not just, as I said before, that's not just restricted to the communication side of things in using the tools associated with disability in their arts. That's a key feature, incorporated as a key feature and not just as a support. It is often a very large part of identities, and making that part, sometimes for some people, making that part of an identity, disregarding a part of their identity is disregarding part of them. And Patrick has commented in the chat that one disability advisory committee that they are a member of often doesn't provide visual descriptions for the two blind members of the committee and has forgotten to book an Auslan interpreter for a deaf member too. They are only gradually getting better and remembering access needs for meetings. So that has felt very tokenistic for the consultants. Absolutely. You can't have a group of people advising you on access needs and saying, you need to incorporate this for your program, and then turn around and forget to include it for them as well. It shows that the efforts are towards inclusion are incongruous in that space. And I'm glad to hear that they are getting better. It must be very tiring for those people to consistently have to self-advocate for their own needs. So barriers and pitfalls to incorporating flexible communication tools. As I said previously, it requires consideration and inclusion early. You need to be organised and in terms of your planning and processes, and get all of that built in early. It can't be something that you realise at the implementation phase and go, oh gosh, we are running an online Auslan and online Auslan D&D workshop, and we don't have an Auslan interpreter. How are we going to do that? Let's not leave things until the last minute. We need to be proactive and not reactive in this space. And again, I am running out of time. Moving on to equity building creative tools. So this is a very, very fancy word for all of those curb cut tools that we've been speaking about in the previous webinars. What curb cut tools can we build in or incorporate into our programs? So just a quick reminder, a curb cut tool is a tool that, while originally intended to increase accessibility and inclusion, has the impact of supporting everybody and not just the intended targets. So as we mentioned in the first webinar, a curb cut is that part of a curb where we can actually go up onto the footpath or the curb, either in a wheelchair, with a pram or a trolley, or otherwise. And some other examples within society: closed captions, are a big one, and subtitles, curb cut tools, electric toothbrushes, automatic doors. Some of them are so entrenched in everyday mainstream society that we don't actually realise that they were intended to be accessibility tools. And eventually, in an ideal world, our world would be full of those to the point where additional tools would not necessarily, or supports would not be needed. So let's have a think about what those tools we can build in that will have that effect. Some of those examples of those might be not using really formal or difficult language. Let's keep things simple. You may use to moving plain English or even easy read for some written materials. And this doesn't support people with cognitive disabilities only, although it can support them. It does support people with language, multicultural language access needs, even something as simple as dyslexia. Simplified language is what we would generally put out to the community, and at a level that they call plain English, plain language. Plain language is the standard that our governments put their communications out at, and the intention for plain English, it is generally considered to be plain English if written to approximately a Year 6 or Year 7 literary standard. So if a Year 6 or Year 7-year-old with average literacy skills would be able to comprehend a document, then it is closer to plain English. There are free calculators online, but Microsoft Office has also got a calculator within Word. So if you use Word, you can actually get it to run a check and tell you how difficult the literacy or language level is. So another option for that is an access rider. And not everybody actually understands the term access rider. What it is often a very simple document that asks about the access needs of an individual. So it's a great way to seek information about support needs or provide a participant with an opportunity to discreetly indicate if they need support. So providing a document to all participants in easy read, ideally, to complete if they wish, so that they can identify to you what they will need. It builds trust and safety. And for many people, both, especially in that intersection of culturally, linguistically diverse people with disability, not having to proactively chase support or chase language, chasing a translator, or being anxious about whether or not they will be able to communicate and understand is a very big deal. So generally speaking, an access rider would cover things like communication needs, sensory needs, access in terms of physical access as well. So there is a very, very basic Word version attached to the invite of this webinar. If your organisation doesn't have anything suitable, we welcome you to Frankenstein or cannibalize that document for your purposes. But we do encourage that people include some sort of mechanism for people to indicate the supports that they need. Other than that, storyboards, visual social scripts are a great way to picture guides on events and workshops are a great way to include accessibility information about your programs and events, and providing materials in all of those different accessible forms are other ways we can make things accessible for everybody. Again, money is the problem. Often there is a reluctance to sink funds into things or supports that may or may not necessarily be needed. So on limited budgets, there's often the decision to sink funds where it would be benefit to the largest number of people, and accessibility and translation, things like that are expensive, and so they add it on if there's money left over. And as a follow-on from that issue, there are concerns that are often at a high level of sinking budget and funds into a part of a program with no real indication of how much it's going to be used or if it's only going to benefit a few people. To address that, though, these measures do need to be in place and they need to be communicated broadly. We need to be shouting it from the rooftops if we have access measures in place so that the people that may need or who may benefit from those are aware that we have organised them. They're not going to come if they don't think they're going to be able to participate. And if they don't know that they are going to be able to participate, they're still not going to come. So what we need to tell them, we're trying to make things accessible for everybody. We have done this, and this in terms of our accessibility. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to remove the 3 steps, but communicate broadly what you are doing and what you can and can't do. Let everyone know. Okay, so sometimes the only eventual benefit to spending that money on some of those access supports is the ability to communicate a commitment to inclusion and show that in tangible measures. Sometimes they won't get used. Sometimes they won't be needed. However, having those in place can lead potentially to future participation, other funding opportunities as the organisation builds reputation within the sector as having those access needs incorporated or being a safe and welcoming place for various peoples. It is considered an investment in the future. And, some things such as signage, documentation in language or easy read art materials, these can often be reused in other programs where you don't exhaust them in the initial one. So they aren't the financial sinks that sometimes they are viewed to be. So this slide is the 4 main questions you need to be asking yourself in that program design phase around your inclusion. So if these questions are considered and responded to in an open and non-judgmental way, the basics for inclusion should be incorporated. So the workbook does have a more comprehensive and a more expanded version of this, and it's titled Inclusive Arts Processes. And you might note that the previous section in that workbook, the section previous to that, that we completed in the previous webinar, it does focus on the removal of barriers, whereas this section, these are all proactive inclusion measures rather than reactive access support. So that's sort of the difference, and that's where we sort of look to move forward. So with those ones, the co-creation check. Are you paying someone with lived experience to shape the purpose and the format? And we offering choices about participation? How are we communicating to ensure that everybody feels safe and welcome and has what they need to participate? And how are we making sure that they feel safe from harm and judgment? So what I might change it, instead of it being your favorite afternoon snack, would anyone like to share their favorite comfort food when they need a bit of comfort? May or may not be the same type of food. Would you like to start, Emmanuel?
Yes, I would say Ghana jollof rice. Yes, one comfort food. And if you meet any Nigerian, tell them Ghana jollof is the best.
For me, comfort food, it's really, really terrible, but it's it's mac and cheese made on the shelf stable craft plastic cheese. Something about we couldn't. I missed a lot of my Australian foods when we were living in Japan, and that was one of the only things that would actually make it over in the post successfully. So my grandma used to post plastic craft cheese so that I could have a taste of home. So that is my comfort food. But I will also miso ramen. Find it very hard to get a good one here in Australia, but miso ramen is also very much a comfort food. And Brendan has mentioned vanilla ice cream. Danielle, in keeping with yesterday, has mentioned chocolate. Maureen is still saying Tim Tams. Oh, and Tim says a chai latte or anything fizzy. A fresh pastry from the bakery nearby, and now I'm getting hungry again. On that note, thank you everybody for attending. I will Monday morning distribute a survey about the trainings, these 3 trainings that everybody's attended. If you haven't done all of them and you are planning on attending any of the sessions next week, please wait until after next week's sessions. You are more than welcome to re-attend. Even if you have been to all of these ones, I would love to see you at next week's sessions as well, if you so wish. But thank you very much for attending, and I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Emmanuel, thank you so much for coming and help and doing this with me today. Is there anything further you wanted to add to this? No. That's quite all right. Thank you very much, everybody. And as I said, have a wonderful weekend.